Welcome to class. I'm so glad that we're going to start with a rather interesting advanced type of bridge pose, which it's about time we got some kind of full lengthening in the core body. I usually break this pose up over the last, I don't know how many years I've done the bridge pose with. Often it's kind of chopped into the easier parts of it, but we're going to advance on a little today. So what you'll need is your bolster right center on your mat so you can sit on the edge of it towards your feet. And then your blanket will be at the back in a quarter fold. You can always flatten that to a lower height. It's occasionally helpful to make it easier for your neck. But the rolled up blanket in the front is important. So I have a rolled up blanket that I will be compressing with my feet anyhow. So you want to make it in a pretty good tube. And then as you put your hips and you start to lower back on your hips, be as far forward on that bolster as you can. So if it bothers your knees to sit like this, step your feet forward on the other side of the blanket then. And then you want to sit as far front on that bolster, the short end, as you can. And as you start to lower back, it's a core experience, the 70% of this engagement to lower down. So I put my hands beside my bolster, and then as I kind of let my back creep down onto the bolster itself, then I push into my feet and I slide back, and don't worry if that blanket unrolls a little bit, step to it, and then let your upper tip of the shoulder blades touch onto the floor besides your blanket. So the blanket is only for your neck and your brain, okay? Now, I start with my knees bending because it's easier for my lower back to adjust. What you might want to do is really feel where the shoulders kind of push back into that bolster. If you're sliding back too much, then you'll want to scoot the bolster farther back. Okay, so I do want to encourage you to make sure that you're enough on that bolster, as much of your body, so you get the most expansive stretch for your breathing muscles. Now I just let my feet rest on my blanket, and I'm going to scoot the blanket a little forward. I'm not worried if the roll comes out, but that I have something my heels set on. If getting oriented to this one takes you one more time to get up and reestablish your alignment on the props, do it. It's worth it. Because once we get into the orientation on the bones and the circulation into the pose, I want you to get the feel now of putting your sand or some sort of weight on top of your upper legs, and then let that circulation flow from the hips down through the ribs and then beyond into the upper reservoir of the lungs. So that may feel like your lung space is kind of pushed a little bit back. And that's okay, it's an inversion. The energetics of a bridge pose is more of an inversion than we give it credit for because of this assertion in the chest. So as the arms can go either down, you'll see that this is taught with the arms open, straight out as well. And when I start to motion my arms in a particular position symmetrically, then I can decide how to start to align my breathing experience along the rib cage. So come into this pose if you're, working on fidgeting yourself into orienting your sand the right place. If you have many sandbags, you can layer them, but keep it so it's a little more thigh oriented than up onto your ribs, so that the natural articulation of the ribs can happen. As the mind centers on breathing, let this be a beginning for your practice and even into this day, as far as maybe your first practice of carefully identifying movements in the lungs and the bones. And as we have a little bit of a body meditation, which is what most of these poses are, right? The legs have some awareness of relaxing here. So feel the feet soften to maybe a turning out of your feet for this time. And noticing fundamentally when the feet have their natural externalizing position, can you start to create a little habit where you have the feet so they reach forwards energetically. Maybe the toes point up for a moment and the legs get a little bit closer, and see if you can find a rhythm of releasing in a somewhat formal position for the legs. So we're moving from the splayed position of the legs towards about hips distance apart, and feeling the feature of the thighs centering. And then we move into the back muscles and the ribs and working on opening the chest for the benefit of the hydrating of the vertebral column. Right? So think about poses like cat-cow, arching and flexing the spine, how that is very hydrating for the column. And also think about the rib cage and how that is a bit of a column itself. Okay, it's an expansive state in bridge pose. Deepen the breath, inhale slow. Exhale, letting out. And maybe exhale makes your feet relax too. So a few more moments. If your arms are in the side beam, down by the sides, feel what they're like, expressively open. Or if you want to move your arms so they really reach besides you, opening, be sure that your head, your neck spatially feels centered, almost as if the chest is moving a little towards the chin. So you're opening through that space. Good. Okay, now as we move our sand, we're still experiencing this length in the front zone of the body. So what we'll take is the legs to step besides the bolster. You might be at the very end of that bolster next to that blanket. And if you're nearby the blanket, I would put your feet on the flooring so you can feel the knees and their directional angle out. Move your arms open. And if the knees are splaying out, you're going to kind of squeeze into that bolster. And as you start to lift up your hips into that bridge pose, right? We're not going to add another item under the back. It would be hard to stuff more in. But what we are going to do is to take a hand onto the bolster, since it's right up near your shoulder blades. You're going to pivot the bolster and turn it so it's now horizontal across the mat under the back of your pelvis. So if that's really unfamiliar, it is true that when I'm on my back here, I turn the bolster so it's across. It's no longer lengthwise, straight down, right? So now it's across. And I just pivot that when I was on my back, and that gives me the extra inverted boost in the pelvis. Now, both sides of the pelvis even, lift up your feet and feel when the knees squeeze and move upwards. And then with that pattern of the legs starting to lift, we're going to get a sandbag, a bag of something, right? A bag of goodies. And we'll move that sand so it goes right to the feet. And as we lift up the base of our walking experience to the sky, you'll feel now the feet can't really splay out, right? You can't rotate and have any kind of comical directions with your legs, right? They have to stay rather steady to be able to manage this shape. So now when you feel the body on the bolster, is your pelvis pretty far forward, right? If you reach to your tush, You'll notice it's at the very edge of that bolster, right? It could almost kind of descend on the other side. It's that far forward, so that your lungs really are getting tapped into, right? It's going to push in that lower lobe. And I'll work on encouraging you to let your feet flex. Work on the path of flexing the feet. The knees have some space between them, even if it's a sliver. And the arms reach together. Interlace the fingers. That's usually where arms connect a bit, is the hands. Turn the palms to the ceiling and work on that experience of pushing into your hands up, just like the feet. And as the arms move back behind you, notice the mental discipline that you are moving your arms slowly and slower to reach behind you at the interlace of the fingers, and the legs remain the same. Yeah, your mind has enough basic discipline to move the arms at a different rate than the legs, right? They are both extremity sets, but likely your legs didn't try to move. They were sustained, centered as your arms go overhead. Now, the blanket overhead could be a bit of an issue, right, with this arm selection. It could be helpful. It's likely going to support you. But if it's kind of nagging your shoulders, you know, any of these particular inversions, you could always remove your blanket. It's not required to have that height under your head. I like it for my neck. It feels supportive. Now, with those feet pressing up, can you soften your intensity with the pressure of flexing? And likely that will relax your ankles. And then come into a position where your hands relax their clasp and the fingers open a tiny bit, separate hands side by side. And as they are separated, let your eyes close and feel the circulation in the legs, the dynamic. And just be here. Feel if the feet tend to push or kind of lift, or they tend to pump a bit with the ankle stretch. And that real delicate circulation from the calf into the ankle, those threads, are really interesting to work through because they just get the same beating all day long when we're walking, right? They just have that same repetition. So why not use your practice to influence? And if the knees are getting closer, that is really a sign of, you know, some places in your upper legs that could use some strengthening up into the glutes. So work on routing that separation of the knees just enough, just a little bit. Not to say that you're doing that, but you're working on the tailbone pressing into the bolster. Okay. Now, can you start to move your knees to a little bending? Because they usually go in pairs for most of what we're doing, occasionally, but not the next pose. So when you bend through your knees, okay, and then you push the feet back up, I want you to start to feel the feet moving a little closer towards your center. So that means towards your upper body right now. And then bend your knees so that you feel the back of the legs. Now, as you reach up to your sand and you have a hold of whatever's on your feet to remove, we'll take a left leg down. This is kind of funny feeling to have a hold on one sandbag and one foot. But you'll kind of notice that we're going to change that up for a belt. So the sand does put some information into the leg. So when I take my sand off my foot and place it onto the left thigh, that wasn't a meant to be pattern, but I just thought we'd feel the sand on a foot. Hopefully you tried it. So unravel a belt. And you'll want to get the belt buckle so it's in an accessible place for you to connect. So some of you have the buckle, some have a cinch belt. So take that connection and make it a wide loop. Whether you're going to use this loop to traction your neck or traction your shoulders. I really like this blanket at the base for my leg. It feels pretty nice to have that encouraging height. So the key right now is to feel the sand on the top of the left thigh, to bring the belt, so you bring the motion of the leg up and back. Up is the key, like you're kicking into the belt, your heel kicks up, and ensure that the belt loop is really wide, okay? And always tighten it up. Reach the belt, hopefully not twisted too much, to the center of the back of your head. It depends on, pending position, that your belt is supporting your neck stretch, but also the weight of your head leans back into the belt, so it's on the occipital ridge. Okay, feel the right foot, flex a little bit through, and it's not really a choice you have with your foot in the belt. It requires some flexing. So I like to kind of push into my bolster and really get my center of gravity in my pelvis supported. And I know everyone's length is different with their arm position on their bolster right now. Some of you might have your elbows on top. So take the path of reaching through that left heel, like you're pushing down, slide the sand on the thigh so you feel like it's a weight into the quadricep, okay? And then once you let your arms find a resting, then the weight of the head lingers into the belt. So noticing what's important to be particular about, it's likely going to prioritize right now with your neck versus if your left foot is turned out or not. Some things you accept, and you feel the other parts of the body that could change their assignments, which might eventually affect how your leg responds here. So come into this brain float. If you need a variation from this one instead, you'll take your belt in your hands, so the webbing of the thumb and the index is holding your belt together with the palms, and you'll stretch your arms back overhead. Perfect option. Little more hamstring work likely, but if you don't want that belt to the back of your head, then no requirement. Now my arms are in an open place if my belt is behind my head, so that the neck has that contour. Okay, now when you spend a moment to hold onto your belt with your hands, and I would take that sand support, so when we shift the leg in the belt, get a feel right now of the hold of the belt. Now, if you are comfortable with taking the sand off and switching the foot in the belt, you might need to hold your belt and then change the side so nothing slips and is awkward, okay? Now, when I switch the side, whether it's my hands holding the belt or the belt is on my head is holding my belt, I'm going to move my sand to the right leg and manage the stretch. Now, your sand could be straight down the leg, it could be turned on the leg across, but with this change of support, right, second side, I can stretch the arms open, but I can work with how does this neck manage this intensity. So your leg flexibility will change that intensity on the neck, right? So if you're quite open in the hamstrings, this will likely be a fairly carefree experience there, but not necessarily at the very upper back. So since our neck is not twisting at all in this position, use the fundamental weight of your brain and relax the tissue and all of the brain into that belt. It's pretty rare that we have a pose that gives traction this way to our neck. Very rare. You know, other neck poses, they would be considered things like, you know, weight bearing, like headstand and things like that. But we're not going to be doing that weight bearing type of work on the vertebrae in here. So these are some of the other choices we have. That is possibly the safer channel in concept. Notice your right foot, if it's turned out, if it's different from the first side, and what energy through the leg could be centering. And just a few moments with this perspective ahead. Push into that left foot. Find the solid sensation for the spine into the brain. It's pretty trippy, right? The whole connector from the brain down through our spinal column into our body, right? All the connections are there. It's more connected than we realize sometimes, huh? So as you feature the movement of the stomach, expand and contract. Hands to the belt. Carefully slide it off the back of your head, lower your head to the blanket. And then as you move that sand, you'll push up into the belt with both feet and push them out, okay? Now, something I've been working with in this wide angle shape for inversion has been to change the hold of the belt. So this is a foothold, right? And actually it's working okay with the knees. Sometimes the knees will tend to rotate in. Yours might not have an established connection to your core, right? So this is all this kind of strange, you're upside down. The core connection to the legs can be kind of broken. So if you don't feel that core connection, stay with this pose if you're comfortable, but if you want something a little different, you can unbuckle and you would hold the belt with your hands and push out into the feet. And notice if that's different than when it's connected. I would try both anyhow. And I think it's just variety that's exciting, you know, to change it up. That may be why. But it's a little more simple balance for most people because you can monitor the width, right? So if you're feeling jittery, it's a little easier to manage that width than if it's already buckled up and you're sort of stuck. But you're never stuck. If you need to get out, you get out. So come into this for a few more moments and notice the angle of, or actually sense the feeling around your knees right now. So you want to feel that you're pushing out into that belt, regardless of the selection of handling it or not. And if you're not handling it and it's connected, you can move your arms out on the floor and or overhead, right? So you might take it so your arms are back behind you instead. I think that buckle woke everybody up. So with that connection in the back of the pelvis, at this point, this is inversion is feeling like a normal state of existence, at least for this time on Saturday. Breathe, filling the core and relaxing the center of gravity to the pelvis. And now we're going to change it up a lot. So we're going to bend the knees. You're going to take the belt, or you're already holding it with your feet drawing together. And then as you soften through the back of the pelvis, start to get hip oriented. So slide the belt aside And then take a block to each side of your bolster, right onto the side. Set a block so it's flat. Okay. You don't need any extra support right now with sand quite yet. If you like to use it for this crossover shape, you might keep it easy reach. Arms are open, straight out, knees to the right, and feel the legs trying to reach to that block. So it's the lower the block, it might be a significant difference for your back to stretch. But work going side to side. You can only go so fast when you have this bolster stuck under you. So the windshield wiper path is slower. But use movement to loosen up the hip and the spine, right? And through the rib chamber. You rest your eyes. Your head can turn opposite direction of where the knees go. Or the brain can stay right center and back, which is fine. You don't have to move your head any specific way. But when you come back into the center, get a feel here for the knees a little forward, okay? And then we'll move the thighs as close to the ribs as you can. Tuck them in so you're in more of a cannonball shape. And then hands on the bolster, or right next to the edge of it, next to your body. And then knees in a little tighter towards your head, and then push the bolster. Now try to keep your knees in towards your face as long as you can. So you're using that very lower core pit when you bring your knees into your face. So just imagine if you had no bolster there, you would really have to use that lower stomach to keep the knees in and your back up. So you're going to use this as testing ground for your core. So get to the edge where your bolster's just barely touching you. Yeah, try to keep all your things on there. Okay, the bolster is just touching you, right? It's just holding your core muscles. And then can you lift up your feet a little bit and then push, hands on the bolster so you can use your core, hands on the bolster, and then push the bolster away and still keep the knees in. I know you might get a little shaky doing that. And then once you commit to your tail on the floor, which is just fine, you're going to put your feet on the bolster, scoot it as far forward as your fingers could push, and then lift up your hips into bridge pose. Another bridge. How many bridges can we make? So the hands are flat first, lifting the hips, lifting. Try to push down into your arms, and maybe you remove your blanket. This might be a good time to pass on blankets. And as you lift up your hips, feel when the arm bones turn the hands open, and feel all the way up the arm bone, that rotating out. Good. Now this is often in like bridge variation 1, when it's first taught, is often grab the sides of your mat and push. But I find that I can be a little disciplined right now with my hands open, but getting the whole arm bone to rotate it's a challenge because I've got a body in between the arms that I need to keep lifting, okay? So when you lower down, I want you to feel that movement of the spine on the floor. So obviously the leg muscles are contracting all the way up to the rear. So feel that co-contraction of the legs and then gradually lower down. But once you get right behind the heart space, I want you to scoop the pelvis so you really feel the tail scooping like a cat pose. And then stop right before the tail touches down, right before the tail is down, and then push down into your feet and lift back up. Okay, so if this is too much, you can always take a break and lower all the way and bring your knees to your chest. That's an option. It's a good one. You can take it anytime. as we lower down again, we're lowering down all the way to almost lowering the very base of your spine. Now notice how low you can go before you're just about touched down all the way and feeling relaxation. So stop right before you are all the way centered on the back. Okay, feel the legs still fired up, right? They still have a little bit of little ignition there, okay? Now, when you lower down all the way and you can feel the measurement of controlling your glutes, your buttocks kind of relaxes. I want you to bring your feet together, your knees out in Baddha Konasana. And let's see, you've got blocks, I hope, nearby. If you got something, you might kind of stuff the blocks under the legs. Sometimes it perfectly works that you can pivot your block. We're not done with the bridges, so you might keep your blanket away from under your head for a few more. It's interesting to feel the detail of your back anyway, all the way to your brain without blanket. So I'm going to adjust my blocks so they hold my legs so that creates a basket down into the pelvis. It's like a basket, right? Your knees are out, and then all the way down to the pelvic basin, pelvic floor. And the key would be to relax here. It's not to grip the glutes and the adductors, but to flush the lymph, okay? So when this position centers, can you stretch your arms open? Just keep it simple value. It's not going to be an artistic change with the arms. And as the spine centers, can you work on keeping as much of your back to touch to the floor as you can? Like all the waves of movement through your spine. Now, with a few moments here, we're using this as a centering practice for the spine. Okay, feel the feet push together. If they don't know how to get closer because they're confused about the pushing element, it's really an interesting path of the leg muscles. So I would encourage you to try to get your feet to push together. Of course, if anything, it's violating, like you hurt in the knee or any part of the joints hurt, pass on it. But if it's okay and it doesn't hurt anywhere in the knee, it's a good pattern for the circulation there. If you're fine with it, it's good to ignite that. So push the feet together. Probably they only go so far in. You don't want to push them so close together that you can't get them apart. Okay, and now we start to move our tailbone down and our knees pointing up. So that's got to mean my feet have to part. Feet on the bolster, and then push to lift into bridge. Now this is where you have total choice. Arms go overhead. Choice is either bolster under your feet or no bolster. So we'll take draw bridge, lift and lower. That's kind of nice. My blocks are right there for me. Alternate lifting and lowering the hips and the arms overhead. Not the hips overhead, but the arms. And if you decide, well, I'm going to take the last 3 or 4 of these bridges, kick the bolster to the right side of your mat, you might go ahead and take the last few bridges with your feet on the floor. And it is significant difference for some people to feel that control of the firm ground. So consider those options. The bolster makes it a little easier to get all the way up the spine, right? That's the difference. So if your feet are on the floor, I need you to try to work with getting the hips to lift. So remember, bridge pose is related to shoulder stand. That's why it's an inversion, right? So the energetics of it are shoulder stand. So next time you're lifting up, the circulation goes to the upper chest. The energy is expansive in the upper lungs and the thyroid, okay? Now once you get as high as you can with the hips, last time my arms are overhead, If my feet are on the floor, I can actually get my feet to push down in a different intensity than the bolster, right? So with the final path of this bridge set, feel the feet parallel as you can. No dependency on a block or ball right now between the knees right now. And then as you lift your heels up, you're going to stretch your arms to the ceiling and then let the spine glide down. Feel where there's control in the back of the pelvis into the glutes. And then I want you to bring your knees to a little wider than hips distance apart. And then if you've got your bolster, I want you to push that over to the right side. So we're bolster free right now. It's over on the right. You're going to want it in a few moments too. But bring the knees together. Instead of the feet together, the knees are together. Slide a blanket in under your head and have those comforts of the relaxation of the knees in. If you feel that blanket down at the base, we'll eventually get to use it. But with the knees to touching, the feet apart, turn the toes inwards, okay? And then feel for the moment the arch in the spine. You could slide your hands under your back easily and reach the hands together. It's a simple openness in the lower back. So feel that arch in the back, okay? Feel the tops of the thighs gradually resting. And then stretch the right heel down. If the blanket's in the way, kick it a little bit over. You don't want that in the way of your stretch. So right heel down, and then lift up the left thigh and feel how that knee was turned in. So we're going to keep that leg reaching to the bolster on the right. It's over on the right side of your mat now, the bolster. So reach it over, and you know, I like to analyze things a little bit. So when I had that right leg go down and this left leg didn't really stay disciplined in. So try to work with pushing from your tailbone over to that leg on the bolster. And then you'll add a sandbag on the outer left leg. The ball is helpful. For some of us, we might use something that's at the sacrum. So you want to kind of stuff that in. And don't be surprised if you feel a little more mobile after the last set we did for this pose, just recently, today. So you might feel like you can really roll over with your hip bone from the bridge set. And as the left arm opens and the ribs move left, keep it balanced, right? So the ribs have to stretch open to the left arm, and it's not taken all the way down to the right hip. So you've got to kind of dissect the experience here. Turn your head to the left arm. Yeah, and those that are antsy to get a little more intensity with the position, right? You'll bend your right knee and start to move your right foot up towards the seat. That's an option. And you can bring your right arm across your chest and hold that right wrist with your left hand to get a little deltoid stretch. That might be helpful for the arm. If it feels like it's a real suction around your arm, like it's gripping it up, that's good, right? We're stretching through the rotator cuff as well as the deltoid. So feel your head turn to the left. You can always let go of that right hand anytime if you have the arm crossed. No reason to have to hold it, but you can feel the release of the arm open. And if the pose feels pretty easy for you after the set we did, it is possible that could happen today. Simple. Feel that right leg bending if you're working a little more challenging. Now, those that have the right knee bent and the foot closer to the rear, keep it as is. Those of us with our right leg straight, what we're going to work towards is to move the ball, if you have that, away. And you're going to start to guide your legs, so stand free. The left leg's going to cross over the right. So if you had the right leg straight, you got to slide it in. And then as your leg is crossing, you're going to bring your knees to the left for a counter twist. So this might be one where you end up getting the bolster over there on the left side soon. But if you're comfortable with it right now, you can keep it just like this. Left leg crosses over right leg. So it's really wrapped around as high as it would go. The leg is only going to wrap so high up on the other side. It's not quite like an arm formulation. The shoulder joint is a little different than the hip joint. So feel how you are working the boundary of your right hip into the lateral rotators. Yeah, keep that kind of squeezing effect through the legs. Circulation is dense. And then bring the knees back center, uncross, take the bolster to the left, and begin that path of getting ready for going into that second crossover. So I'm going to scoot myself a little to the right side of my mat so I have a nice kind of launching pad to move into. So as I move, last time we had the knees together. This time, feel when your knees are up and notice that bounce of action in your lower back when you just kind of lift up your feet off the ground. You kind of point your toes and spring up. The spring of your, the ball of your feet, that spring lift. Kind of interesting to work with that over and over, that repetition. And then let the left leg straighten. And then keep that right leg so it's lifting. And as it crosses over, notice how you move on the bones of the leg, right, the top leg into the glute as the leg swings to the bolster. Okay, now if your bolster is too low, you can add anything on top of that if you want to get to your other blanket and put that on top of the bolster. I'll show that in just a second so you have an awareness of that. But the ball can go to the sacrum and the sand can go to this outer leg. So, you know, if you do find this bolster is too low, some of you might be just fine, but the blanket addition can be nice to have, just can be a little more comfortable. It's not necessarily lesser of a pose, right? If it doesn't work for you to get your leg there, you need something to add. So take what you need and then add any props, whether it's sand or the ball at the sacrum, which is clearly anchoring your pelvis. And then as that right arm moves out, can you feel those small motions of the shoulders, the collarbone opening to the right, and likely your head can turn and roll from the back of your skull over to the right. And once you land your head to turning, there's no turning back yet, right? You want to keep going into the pose. So there's these opposite traveling experiences in the core body. One, the leg is crossed left, and one, the ribs and the upper body turn to the right. So feel where your arms are comfortable. Okay, if that for you is a little more work and you want the left arm across the chest, you just like to have that information going into your nervous system of circulation, that's fine. You can hold the left arm with the right hand and stretch through the deltoid and the back. It's good stuff. Feel where the weight is in your body and surrender there. Feel the belly move with the breath. You can release the arm if you have that engaged anytime. And as we're working our way to feeling these lines of energy twisting, you're going to move the ball, the sand, and we'll take that counter twist with the left leg. If you had your leg bending, okay. If you can start to bend your left leg, let's bend it. And then cross the right leg over the left. And as the legs are going to swish over to the right side, you're going to want to feel that motion of the hip. Okay, so the knees go right and the left side of the leg, right, the whole side frame of the hip is going to feel that circulation all the way into the lateral rotators and that side band of the leg. If you crave a little more windshield wiper movement, you can always take that option right now. Is let the legs swing side to side. And as we prepare to move from this back line to our front, you know, we want to use all these building blocks of being on our back. The elongation factor, but noticing our arms are going to be, you know, useful to kind of fill in the gaps coming up here. We can only lay back so long. Okay. I don't want to hear so much snoring. All right, so as we come into windshield wiper, uncross, so the feet are set wide and the knees are going to shift from side to side. Yeah. And notice the path of movement of your leg motion and your rib motion. So my feet are set into whatever spacing feels good for me. I mean, moving them farther out might be good, closer in. It's really individual, isn't it? Like you do a lot of poses, you're going to take some of the information and use just the amount you want, because it's your practice. So when you do come up, I want you to try boat pose. So that might make a collection of thoughts for you. So you don't need any props, right? It's really a very solo adventure in this boat pose. So the connections that we've made will help us out. So feel when you move your knees towards your chest, and remember that path we had where we had our bolster under our hands, we were kind of holding the hips up a little bit. Well, now you want the hips to be heavy. So you're going to hold the back of the legs and come up and get a feel whether you do a couple of those, swinging your body into that space of balance. You might do several and then work your way towards a still point where you are holding the backs of the legs. So you're holding something behind your leg, whether it's closer to the upper back leg or to the back of the knee. And then work your way towards putting your feet down. And then as you come back to move your seat back, push your seat back about maybe 75% of what you could. And then place your weight into your sitting bones. Lean your upper body back. Okay? So door one would be here. My arms reach forward. It's pretty good. I can feel the energy in the core. And door number two would be to bring my legs so they stretch up. Well, that's a little fiery on my hip flexors, so I'll stay here. But you could be here and work with the full Navasana. So work on the sensation of the upper body leaning back, okay? I know that the spine will round, the neck will go forward, but as you experiment with this position, experiment is enough, okay? We're going to roll towards the side. So come back down with your feet if they were up. Go to the side. You're going to take your blanket in. And you're going to take your knees on top of that. And I want you to place your hands simply forward with the body weight to stretch your hip flexors. So the tops of the feet down and then lengthen forward. If this wasn't a named pose, we don't have to go name that pose, but lengthen the front space and feel where the rich stretches in your center line of the body, in front of the spine. Okay, now weave back all the way, stretch back your hips. If your blanket's wadded in the wrong spot under your knees, change it. And then round your back so that you kind of huddle in the center. and then you motion, and the forward glance goes to the ceiling and back. Okay, come back to that table position and then keep moving back towards child's pose. So if you're like a comfortable child poser and you want to go all the way to that pose, that's fine. Okay, I'm trying to keep this a movement pattern. So we're coming up, we're stretching through that center line of the body, and we're reaching our gaze up and back. Okay, so come back into center, find the weight now into your blocks. Okay, so we're going to take a block under each elbow, and you'll put your elbows down, the blocks flat. I know this is a different pattern in your shoulders. So if it feels bunched up in your shoulders, you can move your blocks farther forwards, okay? But here we have the knees in a separate angle, so they're in a wide stance. And try to bring that left leg back when the knees are in the wide stance. So you're going to lift up that left leg, reach it behind you. Now, as you lower down the left knee, stretch back through that right leg. Okay. Now, explore the movement of that right leg. Can you turn the hip open? Do you want to kick the leg higher? Where are the ranges of motion through the joint? When we're all safe because we've got the elbows down, the wrists are not going to have a lot of challenge, but the shoulders have to work a little bit more to be here. The upper back has to strengthen to be here. This is an upper back strengthening position. So we held that a long time. Bring the knees back together, and now the left leg back. So the knees are starting from being together. Okay, so practicing that path of reaching through the left heel. Simple. Lift the leg as high as it will go with the back comfortable. So not to take it any farther out. But you might notice that if you lift the leg and lift the leg and lift it, the back arch is significant, but likely comfortable. It's interesting what it does into the lower back, juicing into those tissues. And then as you start to lower down, I want you to hover the left foot over the floor. Okay, lift up a little bit through your chest so you're looking forwards. And then lower down your gaze, bring the left knee down besides the right. And if you need to take a break and child's pose between these two sides, if you're tired, take a break. Some people might want that, might want to stretch back and release, but we might keep going. So the right leg goes back. Those of you ready for that? And then feel how the palms are trying to turn open. The bicep, right, is in between strength and flexion, so it's neutral. And then lift that right leg up a little higher. So get the feel that, am I going with toes or my heel? I want you to focus on lifting the leg, so it might mean that you bend the right knee a little bit. Like you're trying to get to the ceiling with the right leg. So anything goes, right? It could be flexing, it could be pointing. Just be careful because the hamstring, sometimes cramping happens with that pose. Not unusual. Now, when I lower down, take your right leg down, hover it over the ground. Breathe. Yeah, notice the arms. They've had a little bit of work here. So as you lower down the right knee, you can either keep your blocks under your hands or take them out and come to dog pose. I'm going to put my blocks forwards and make sure they're flat, my heel and my hand on the edge. The reason I like the blocks is it puts more weight back into my legs, so it's less for me on my wrists. But for some, it doesn't make any sense. Some people just can't find the block reasonings. And that's okay. So if your block is sliding, you do not want to use a blocks like this. So you come down and you put them off to the sides. This is fine. And you push back to dog pose. Up to you. Take the pose for a few moments here. Let the arms extend. Feel the weight of your spine trickle down to your brain. We'll take one forward bend now. So we'll walk back into our feet and set your feet next to the blanket and position your hips so that you get a feel of your feet in a wide enough stance that your hips lift, your hamstrings stretch, but more important, your brain is below your heart. So this is going to change your chemistry, right? Your blood pressure. So if you have some concerns and you do not want that to be a dramatic change in your consciousness, you could put your hands above your knees and be a little higher up and still get the stretch in the legs and that connection through the spine. If you're comfortable all the way into the forward bend, have your hands holding your elbows and let your spine traction. Let the weight of your head go. Yeah, either way, hands above the knees or in a carefree version, be sure that your head weight can release. Breathing slowly. Feel the weight into the corners of your feet. Good. Give it a few moments here. Okay, now as we start to motion ourselves forwards, take the opportunity to bridge from your forward bend to the inversion of inverted V, which is dog pose. So I'm going to kind of keep my knees in a strong bend. So, well, it keeps your top on usually. That's one reason you can bend your knees like this. You find ways to do things. So funny. But when I'm with the hands here, I feel a little strength oriented in my shoulders. Okay, now that might not be good for everybody's wrist. So for some of us, we might grab the sides of the mat here. Okay, and the heel of the hand down and then push back, but keep the knees bending. Now I want your ribs to have some significant inversion right now before we go to side stage. So that will mean dog pose, right? Or you could be like a handstand, something like that, if you prefer kicking up, but we're going to stay pretty restorative here. Now, when I start to bring my knees down, however awkward it can be, I'm going to lower down, and then I want you to get your bolster. And you know, however your bolster is, if you got stuff on it, maybe minimize that. And stretch your hips on the bolster lengthwise so that you're reaching down and your legs have to narrow out so the core can work its way into an arch. Right? It's likely that if you lift your hands, you'll lower down. Okay? So just noticing your opportunity here for arching and strengthening all the way up between your shoulder blades here. Okay, so work on the power here. If your elbows need to come down to the floor, that's fine. Like if you're in Sphinx pose, elbows down, you're still working on this lift. Okay, so you're choosing. All right, so this is a bit of a core path right now through the mid-body, the posterior core. It's a good thing to do for the core is work the back muscles, the back of the core network. Now, if we lower down, we're going to let the toes hook under and push ourselves back and turn our bolster across and then stack up. I'm going to use my blanket under my hip for this version today. It's been a long time since we changed up the version, so it's just good medicine to get that variety, okay? Different concoction. So when I lean into my right hip, this is too low, right, for my brain. So I'm going to put a block under. You could, you know, you have more blankets, you could get another blanket. If you have a rolled up, actually, if you have a circular bolster, that's what I mean. If you have a circular bolster versus rectangular, you could put that bolster here and the flat bolster on the other side, okay? So when you come into this, you're leaning down. I'm dependent on a ball on the inside of my left leg and a sandbag on my left side. So taking that support, and with that reach of your left arm, the other block might be necessary. Like I need every prop that I have in my prop house right now for this one. Pretty much, except belt. Okay. So if the blanket feels a little different than you've used, it's been a while, then we use that blanket under the hip. You don't have to, but it is an option that might be welcome for today. So with that reach of that left arm, the right arm is waving between the two. If you have the round bolster, it's under your ribs, use it. Just use it. And if you have a flat one, it doesn't have to be this direction under your head. It could be turned the other way lengthwise, so you have the reach with the hand. But you know, you can play up with the bolster idea on that or not use it. But the key would be that I have the elevation in my ribs. So as you're here, nice, looks good. We have that side reality, and experiment with that awareness of the sides. Yeah, usually we're going forward. So anytime we can explore and get still in the body meditation on the sides of the body, so the rib cage and how that kind of leads into the lower back waistline, the kidneys. Inhale, ribs expand. Exhale, letting go. Now where the ribs up to the armpit chest can reveal a little more circulation for most that we can feel. Even if the left arm gets a little bit tapped out and you move it open and slide it a little back and forth, even if the arm is tired, you'll still get the side body stretch, right? Because you have this bolster under you that's pushing up that hip, above the hip, not the hip, but above the hip. So the whole range of motion. Now, we're going to work our way into a kneeling back bend pose, right? Which is going to work on the whole front of the leg into this ridge of the ribs that have been plumped up. So we'll do it between the two sides, so you'll have that advantage. But when you do that motion here, right, we're going to take the sand aside. You've got layers of stuff on you. You'll start to take that away. Now, if I bring my knee back to the right leg, right, it closes some of those tissues up. So we want to go rather soon to get up, right? Not spend too much time passive. So we turn around to come to the blanket, right? We have a blanket under our knees. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is to come to that kneeling position. And then when you center up onto the knees, you want to feel the sense of the hips moving forwards and the lift of the chest. There's nothing more that you need to work with. You don't have to add a bunch of props here, but feel the core value here of that lift of the rib cage. Okay. And then come back center and look down to your knees, and are they kind of splaying out? Right, we want to have them right centered under the hip bone. So you want to keep the knees in a very specific alignment. If it's hard for you to do that, I wouldn't recommend putting a block in because it might widen them more than necessary because you'll be squeezing the thighs. But what you might do is let the tops of the feet shift so the toes are under. Sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't. So the top of the foot is down or the toes are under works. But if the toes are under, then when I push forwards, I have to be a little careful of the side, the mid side of the waistline, so that that space is reaching down to the back of the pelvis. So feel the shoulders move back, feel the chest lift up, and keep the hips going forwards. Find just the right intensity for your hips and your back and your knees. Okay, now when you bring your arms forwards, you're going to lean a little bit back, just a tiny bit. So you're working the front of the thighs. Now lift the arms and kind of get a feel of the side range. Okay, and then lean down. So you're going to do an up dog with the hands to the sides, of, well, actually inside your mat. And then stretch your hips down and forward. And notice if this is better for you for your back bend. So just, they're both back bends, right? One is considered a little bit deeper, but this might be better for some people's backs and knees, right? So try to work. The challenge is to try to get your head up and back because you don't have that leverage as you do on your knees, okay? So when you come back to table, round your back into the complementary child's pose, or not child's pose, cat pose. Don't do child's pose right now, that wouldn't be very helpful. So into cat, opposite. Now, when you hold your cat, they don't like to be held too long, so feel the tops of the feet down, feel the spine, then let your chin tuck to your chest. That's a big part. Okay, hips move back like they would in child's pose. And you're going to turn to your left hip into your side sage. And I want to give you a little bit of awareness. We are going to do pigeon pose relatively soon. So I want you to notice your hip juncture here, how this right thigh shifts back. So if you were to like lean into your left leg, right, you could be in pigeon right now, right? So these are all pretty similar positions, but we just kind of look like we're doing something different. So when that right leg stretches back, you place your sand on the external body. Well, it's your body, but maybe you think of it as externalized. And then as you move your limbs over, right, your right limb reaches over, you'll adapt to the next side, right? Whether you need your block, you want to use your props so they're supporting you. If you have a round bolster, you have that. It does feel different with a little more bulk under your ribs. It gives some advantage to circulation. And it might feel a little intense on your lungs. So as we adapt, breathe slow. There's not a lot of breathe fast instructions here. Simply lengthen the side. Yeah, that right knee might really get a feel if it doesn't have a ball or anything on the inside. For some of us, it's a good stretch for the side of the leg. For some, it's important to have something inside the leg to support the hip and the knee joint. And there's a correlation, right, between those two. So if it's a little funny feeling in the knee, then use something on the inside of the right leg. And encourage the ribs to expand and relax. The inhalation is generally searched through in the body with rib movement, right? So we're exploring the rib movement with our inhalation. Now, if you have minimal sand on your arm, you can move your right arm open. You can slide any sand off. You can give some movement with your arm, with your head, motioning. Remember, you want just the right amount of courtesy to your body to feel like you can elongate and really expand, right? Some of these layers, these levers could use that reach out from the core to the levers, which is the arm, but also the legs. So that's where we're going to lead this to connect the dots. All right. So feel where that waist lengthens. Try to let this weave. So we have the right leg as the kind of extending leg right now. It has some patterns of movement right this moment. So what I want us to work with is we're going to close the gap a bit. We're turning left, we're lowering down so my sand gets shoved off. And then when I turn, we'll go right into it. We'll shift to the knees and then we'll move our right foot up to the other side of the bolster. Okay, so if you got a round one, you're going to need to shift it out for the flat ones. It might take you a little bit of technical changes with your furniture. So I'm going to move my blanket aside and then get a couple blocks and then stretch out through that right leg. So lift up the left, actually both legs, lift up the left knee and stretch the heel to the floor and really work with this reach of the left calf, heel down, closer to the floor as it can get. And the right heel has no problem with that, right? Just because you're flat onto it. So work the waist forward, right? This is an extended trunk pose. So we're trying to get our trunk, this core piece, to reach. Even though it seems like the last place in my body I feel a stretch is the core. There's an awful lot of leg experimenting here. Now bend the right knee, and then I want you to turn left. So you're going to take a wide stance for a few moments. So wide stance, drinking giraffe, okay? So the feet are spanning out. The sides of the feet are parallel with the mat. You might be a little sensitive to that and have them turn in. But feel the feet press back to the heels and then take your blocks forward and down. As your head goes, your spine stretches. So maintain that reach with your sitting bones back and up, okay? If that swoop seems to be kind of a motion in your legs, right? Like a comma, right? It kind of moves your thigh bones and they wave a bit. You want to bulk up the top of the legs a little bit like you're drawing up the kneecaps. Okay, so I don't need to have such a bowed leg position that you're starting to skim into the knees. So feel the circulation kind of stiffen in the legs so that the legs are firm and you're in an inversion. Head goes down. You know, purposely move the weight down to your feet and forward into your blocks. Okay, and then take the blocks in a little closer, push down, lift up the center line, turn to the right, bring the right arm up and open twist. So take a few moments with each side to rotate, just a few. Okay, now when you turn, you can feel the left inner thigh rotate. And when you lower your right hand to the block, you're going to turn to the left and that right inner thigh has a little more stretch as well. So turn the left arm to lift up. And if you lose your balance and you're getting a little slippery, scoot your feet in closer. Shift really happens in the body when it balances. And then as you come back down, you'll move to your right foot and turn that foot forward parallel. And when you switch the leg in front, feel the dynamic of springing off the left foot, push off the foot, step. If you want to bow into the body and do a half sun salute, that might be nice to do. Bend the knees, stretch your arms up, lift up the hands together, palms touch, reach up and back. And you flow forward, get enough energy for the full moon today here. And then you stretch that right leg back and then reach down through the heel. Yeah, so stay with the emphasis of straight. in the legs. And lengthen back through that right heel. And reach through the torso. So my block height would be useful for me because I'm in a short world to give myself some feeling of reach in my core and discipline in the leg experience. So with that back heel trying to reach down and that left leg lengthening. Now we'll hinge here, mostly if you think about hinging, that could be a good discussion sometime. Fun to have discussions on these things, but you know, kind of feel when the right hip moves down right now. So it's like your hips can go wonk, right? You can wag your tail, that kind of a thing. But when that right hip moves down and the knee goes downwards, and you slide your right foot back, you're going to lower the right knee and we'll walk the left foot over to pigeon pose. So right leg stays back and left foot walks over. Now your right leg doesn't really stay centered. Do you notice your hip moves over to the right to get here? So when you reach the left knee open, then the hips kind of get a little more balanced. So to do your pigeon pose, sometimes this back bend pigeon can be nice too. It's to lift up a little bit. And then when you lean down, you can put your elbows on blocks or the floor or a blanket. It's fine to use minimal props under your elbows, but encourage that centering of your hips. So since our legs are really revitalized from the last few minutes, use that to tap into for this hip opener. Try to let your upper body stabilize. And if you're kind of in a little bit of hip misery, like, oh, it's so intense in my hip, maybe your left foot gets closer to the bolster. And maybe you're better with the elbows lower. So you decide if you want a little challenge, take the blocks or your elbows on the floor to the right side of your mat. So you're going to kind of shift over to the right. Doesn't have to be on the side of your mat, but upper right side. Oh, I can feel that in the hip. Imagine you can too, but feel where the position is in your mind, where the awareness is leading in the bones. And it's fine if your arms are in the front and center. You do not have to bring them to the right. That comes with time. Now feel where the weight leads into the outer kind of crest of the hip. It's like it's edging on the side, right? So kind of fine tune that, like you're painting like this part, and you want to get the very corner of that left hip to be felt or to be touched on. So when you change sides, can you work with movement? So it's either going to be you push back to dog pose and you slide your right knee forward the next side, right? Or you kind of do a little bit of a shift on the bolster. So you could bring your hands back. I like the blocks. And then I bring the right knee forward. I shift on my seat. And then I reach down with the right knee and I take the left leg back. So sometimes that version works pretty good. Occasionally it doesn't. Okay, so depends on how your hip is adjusting. And learning how to sit on your hip like this is a challenge. It's a pretty strict balance for your hip and the density. But if it hurts your knee, then don't do it. But if anything is kind of quirking around the knee joint, then you've got to back off. So if you lift up here and it pinches anywhere, then you come down with your elbows on the block or the floor. So you, as the decider, feels the arch of the spine, feels the pigeon poking around. And then lean down, maybe, with the elbows in front or to the left. Okay. So kind of this final spinal is not too spinally felt right now. It's a little bit more of pushing out the limit in the leg and then into the hip joint. And really center your back body, right? Let that be included, that you can soothe the lower back, right? So here when I have my elbows down, it gives a little comfort into my back to lower my head. So notice how your upper spine can lower down when your head lowers. And it's a little softer in the back. So just kind of ponder that. Feel the breath kind of slip in, and when it slips in, it moves into your body. So that's something that we'll finish with today, is that obvious choice of breathing and kind of slipping into the focus of the breath in the body. Yeah, this can be so site specific in this pose, right? In the inner leg. And so when we come back, what I want us to work with is moving ourselves back to center. And then we'll take the left leg forward and we'll be in Baddha Konasana for a moment. So your knees are out and your feet are together. And when you have your feet together, feel the distance of your feet from your bolster that works for your inner thighs to stretch. Since we had the last pose where we dissected one side to the next, so now we have both sides. Okay, so when you have your hands onto the legs, can you push the legs out, but you have your hands so they're not pushing on the knees at all, but you feel this inner material of the thigh. Okay, so notice that material of the inner thigh and work on sitting up. I know the knees the legs will resist. They're gonna try to go up. So if it's too much, you put a block under each leg. It's no big deal. The blocks are really great because then it feels like I'm centered. I can do it. So before we get our legs up, which I'll give you a variety of options today for inverting or having a mild inversion is okay. Sounds like a mild tantrum. I'm gonna have a mild inversion. That's probably a good thing to do if you're gonna have a tantrum. Okay, so as you bring the hands so that they're the tops of the inner thighs, you might tap the legs, do a little bit of supportness. Stimulate the flow of lymph, especially down below the knees on the inner zone of the bones of the calves. That can be pretty boggy stuff. Okay, so we'll have an option to come into a legs up the wall version. This will be nice to kind of drain the lymph and also flush the legs. Or you can have the legs up on your blocks, your bolster bench, which is what I'm going to demonstrate. Okay. So once I bring the knees up, I'm going to still try to keep this formula of motion out. So you can slide back off your bolster. Okay. And then you'll choose, there's likely some of you that will want to go to legs up the wall, which you can take that tutorial in your brain and take it there. There might be one or two that want to do a chair shoulder stand, go there. And then there'll be the bolster benchers. Okay, so the bolster benchers will take a bolster with a blanket, like kind of a little bit of a sloppy roll on the top, so it's easy to balance. And then when I have my legs in this path, I'm going to move them up and launch my feet on the other side so that the heels are float. They have a little bit of a float. The heel float is important. I don't want you to have your heels on the other side and they hook down to the floor. So you might need to negotiate your position. I'm going to take a blanket so it's lengthwise under my spine. And when I lower back, when the breath slips in, even though you're naturally breathing right now all the time, you're going on an automatic pilot, put a sandbag right where the base of the sternum to the rib connector, and then come in to the shape of choice And release the weight of your head back. And as the breath is motioning and sliding in through the nose, feel the body beams, right? Feel the beams of the body center in and settle just like it would be if it was a piece of architecture, right? It would settle into its foundation. However, you have a life force, right? You're living and possibly changing. So with these changes in the moment and greater than right here, see if you can center in the experience. Receiving your breath. And relaxing exhalations. Scan the body from the toes, through the feet, the calves, and any of those sounds that are either internal or external. And see if you can go from scanning that awareness back into the breath, moving the body inside, resting the organs, reassuring your mind. Now take a deep breath so that you're taking the breath in and you're using that to supply and oxygenate. And then as you experiment with the exhalation, let the belly soften, relax, empty the lungs. Inhaling slow. And exhaling, letting go. Now, if you have sand on your ribs, depending on your pose of choice, you'll start to transition back to connecting to the group in some ways, to the collective. So if you're on your spine in this position with the arch of the back, I want you to bring your feet just to the bolster bench, and you'll need to let your body roll carefully to the side as to not challenge your back too much, and then take the hands to bring you up and find a seated shape that we can connect in. So feeling that patience of your body to come to a stillness together, and feel when you're in motion back to stillness, and sitting. And if the upright position feels a little stern, see if you can feel yourself a little bit flowy through your shoulders, through your rib cage, through your neck and your brain. And let the hands elevate to balance, connected in front of the heart space. Surrendering there, bowing into the space behind the heart. Inhale. And with exhalation,